I got to say, I'm very excited right now. I got this little preamp booster thingamajig, and it means I don't have to crank my gain up as much. As this microphone apparently needs a bit more power. Hey, the front runner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine, is available for pre-order. I've gotten some nice notes from people who beat the shit out of that link, and just like, I mean, they hammered it. You can visit the bookseller of your choice, Powell's, bookshop.org, HarperCollins, Barnes & Noble, and yes, and plunk down $32.99 and maybe even $65.98. I don't know, $98.97. I'm just doing the math off the top of my head. Everything helps. Every author you know under the sun begs for pre-orders. And you only have so many dollars at your disposal. My gosh. Inflation, am I right? So I'll just say, consider it. Promotional support for the podcast is brought to you by the Power of Narrative Conference, celebrating its 26th year. How has it been that long? That means they're going to be off their parents' health insurance. Last weekend of March, the 28th and 29th, 300 to 400 journalists from around the world are coming. Keynote speakers include Susan Orlean, Connie Schultz, Dan Zak, and Connie Chung. No bigs. Listeners to this podcast can get 15% off your enrollment fee if you just use CNF15 at checkout. To learn more, go to combeyond.bu.edu and use that CNF15 code.
But I mean, it goes all day. It's going right now. Let me see. It's probably got a call today. It gets like five to 10 a day, some of which last as long as 20 minutes. So yeah, I got a couple today.
Oh, hey, CNFers. You know what? I didn't do the theme song thing this week with the clips, with the fresh clips. I ran out of time, and they're a bit of a bear to produce. So you get a teaser quote this week. You're just going to have to deal. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm your unreliable narrator, Brendan O'Meara. Today, we welcome Evan Ratliff back to the program to talk about his incredible, as you can tell, my script scrolled like way too far down, and I'm filibustering, and I found where I'm supposed to be in my script. Incredible podcast, Shell Game. Evan's career to date is so varied and so cool. He's the author of The Mastermind, and we talked about that back on episode 141, a true story of murder, empire, and a new kind of crime lord. He was the co-founder of the Atavist magazine, yeah, that Atavist, before it was acquired by Automatic, the WordPress company, and the reins handed over to none other than Sayward Darby. He was one head of the Cerberus, I don't know, three-headed dog at the now sunsetted long-form podcast, with no shade thrown to the others. Evan, for my taste, was my favorite interviewer. His writing has appeared in many places that would make your head turn and your eyes turn green with envy. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanO'Meara.com. Hey, there. You can check out new blog posts. Blog posts. Been doing that more. You can pre-order the front runner. Sign up for the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. That's there. I think we're all a bit miffed by big tech and the bootlicking billionaires that attended the inaugurations. Like, fuck those guys. Seriously. Permission assets are the way to go. Divorce of the algorithm. It's the place to be. It's the place where I want to live. Book recommendations, exclusive happy hour, cool links, hot, sexy nudes of me, JK, question mark? Okay, Evan, a real journalist, not some bozo with a PR-40, is a two-time National Magazine Award finalist. If I had been a finalist, my mother would have said, you couldn't have won it. He's a two-time finalist for the Livingston Award for Reporting, a Deadline Club Award for newspaper and digital feature reporting. Finalist, oh, God, what a word salad for that award. I'm glad he didn't win that one. And the winner of Clark Payne Award for science writing. Those guys are cool. Shell Game was one of the best shows of 2024, according to Apple's Top 10 Shows We Love, among other best of lists, including mine. I don't have one, but yes, it's atop it. Longform routinely pounded CNF pod into the ground, probably still does. Point being, Evan is a great guy, great journalist, and a really fearless storyteller, and how he goes about the work and how he brings it to life. You can learn more about Evan at kazart.net or kazart.net. Let me spell it for you. CAZART.net. And find him on social at EV_rat, like the animal, _public, like the library. Parting shot on leaning into inconvenience, but for now, here he is. And look at that smile, Evan Ratliff. You can almost recite the manuscript by heart. And you're looking at it, it's like, oh gosh, here we go again. I gotta try to read this and not skim over it because I've read it so many times. Just maybe with the Mastermind or even some magazine pieces that you've read a billion times and before you send it, like, just what's that? How do you keep it fresh in your head and try to read objectively when you can practically recite it by heart?
I mean, it's definitely tough. I mean, it's the same with audio. You got to listen to it a bunch of times. And, I mean, partly I try to like grab onto things that I like in it. Like I will work, take a magazine story. I will work so much longer on the lead than on the rest of it. So I will sit there and just grind over the lead and try different ones. And then when it gets to something I like and I'm feeling good about it, then I'll keep tweaking and keep tweaking. And then oftentimes, even when I'm working on the rest of it, I will go back to the beginning and I'll just do that first. And I get into a mode where it makes me, it feels good that it's working. And then every time I read it, I'm like, maybe there's a word, maybe I can make it work a little bit better. And a thing that you can improve slightly that you're pretty happy with, like, I don't know, it just puts me in a mood of, oh, this is going to be all right. This is going to be good. And I've got to do that with the rest of it. And so I'm going to push on with it because the rest of it is kind of just an endurance battle. Mm-hmm. But something about the lead, something about the opener, like I can't stop tweaking it until they take it out of my hands. But something about doing that kind of like flips a switch and makes the rest of it plausible as well.
Right. That's such a good point to underscore. And it was in my back and forth with the editor I'm working with. He's just so astute and has just bought into the whole book, which is just, I mean, I won the lottery right off the bat with this guy. In our recent exchanges, he was just like I guess you could say probably the weakest of the chapters, just mainly because I didn't have great family access. So the first chapter is kind of like that family stuff. And so it reads a bit thin. And so as a result, it's maybe one of the weaker chapters. And it happens to be the first one. And he's big on first chapters. And so naturally so, because that just sets up everything else. And yeah, so we just in really tinkering with this thing, and it just ended up being platforming a different aspect of that chapter and getting it up higher. And it really, I think, has just totally made it work in a way that it wasn't working before. And it's just, sometimes it is just a matter of moving just a passage from page 5 up to the first page. And it's just like, okay, the expectations feel a little different and it's somewhat downhill skiing from there.
Sometimes it feels like if you lock in the organization of the story from the beginning, that everything just flows. But other times you just get hung up, and then you have lucked into a good editor, because I feel like a lot of book editors don't really get their hands dirty these days. From what I understand, a lot of people have like side book editors that they're having edit books for them. But if you get someone who says, actually, I think if you just like move this here and then work it over a little bit, then you can actually like make the whole thing flow in a different way. And that to me is that's what you want from your editor.
Yeah, I got lucky. This guy likes to get his hands dirty with it. And it could be because I think he's like this with every book, but I think it's especially with this one because he's a marathoner. He's about our age, like, mid to late 40s. And so he's just kind of our generation. He's a runner too, and like Prefontaine just really excites him. So I think he's just really interested in getting his hands in the dough in this stuff, and just really I sent off. I did have a preliminary editor because I had such a sprawling rough draft that I was just like, I need to get this thing cut down by 40,000 words before I even send it off to my main editor, and just like when he got it, he's just in there. I sent the editorial letter to this preliminary editor, and he's just like, that's the best editorial letter I've ever read. And this is a guy who's written like dozens of books. And so he's just like, it's amazing. He's just like, you're very lucky. You have someone who's that invested in it. And I was like, all right, good. Well, I wasn't taking it for granted in the first place, but it's like, I'm especially so these days. I'm learning so much, and just from working with him, it's been an amazing experience in that regard.
Yeah, but it's strange though. Don't you always hear that I know people who partly make a living kind of side editing books. And I mean, I had a great book editor who was a former magazine editor who was like very much in the book. But then people are always saying like, my book editor just says like, yeah, not put it through, but like little line edits. But I don't really understand that. What is the job? Why do you want to be a book editor? Like the like buying books part doesn't seem that fun to me. That doesn't seem that's why people got into it. Maybe they're just overworked. I don't know. I don't know why it is that you don't get book editors who want to deal with structure and chapters and really get their hands dirty as much. I don't know.
Yeah, as we kind of like transition into talking a little bit about Shell Game, I think what I really love about the ethos of the show from the ground up is how you elected to really take a real punk rock ethos and independently produce it, with a small cohort. So what was the sort of and you even talk a little bit about in Shell Game itself, but what was some of the thought process behind deciding to really go like grassroots with this?
Well, I mean, it was a few reasons. The one was just practical. Like, I wanted to get it out fast. I mean, I started tinkering with it late last year, and then I really started developing the voice agents, which is the show's about these like AI voice agents that use a clone of my voice that I send out into the world, and I attach them to phone numbers and I call people with them. So I started doing that early in 2024. And as soon as I started doing it, I was like, oh, someone else is going to do this. And that's a feeling I have on almost anything I do, because it's almost always true. Like if you do a big project, chances are somewhere along the way, you're going to open up your computer and say, oh shit, someone else is working on this. But for this one, I just thought only one person is going to get to do this, like really mess around and be the first one to kind of like say like, I created a voice agent of myself and released it in the world to see what would happen. And as soon as I had that thought, I was like, it's got to be fast. Also, the technology is changing so fast that something could come out that would just sort of change the technology entirely, and better voice cloning software or better AI software or something, and just obviate like what I just done. So anyway, I wanted to get it done fast. And if you're going to work with the sort of podcast platforms and production companies, like they're not particularly fast on anything that's like narrative and highly produced. You could put out an interview show or whatnot, but so I talked to some various outlets, and I left deals on the table, but they were going to start. I mean, they wouldn't even have started now. Like, would you be working on it now? And the show's done. So that was a big part of it. But also, like, I knew that it was going to be I didn't know how personal it was going to actually end up getting, but it was personal to me in the sense of it was important to me. Like, I thought, like, I think I'm onto something here, and I have a really clear idea of how I want to do it. And I've worked with a lot of different platforms and companies in the past. Like, I've seen it all. And in podcasting in particular, it's like, in some way, the podcast industry is, I don't know why, but like maybe it's just developed so rapidly that it kind of like tried to emulate like Hollywood structures. And so you get these situations where you just have like, you get notes from just like random ass people that are executives. And there's just a lot of bullshit that seems completely unnecessary to me, which is not to say like it's valuable to work with platforms and companies because they have a lot of the great producers work there, and you need a good producer, and they have the money. Although the other calculus is like the narrative podcast industry has has declined over the last couple of years. So you can't get the same budget. So at a certain point, it's like, well, how much budget am I going to get anyway? And so I had a past history of doing a lot of independent projects. That was kind of like one of the reasons we started Atavist. We were like, you don't need a big magazine to make these stories great. Like you can do it on your own if you know how to hire a fact checker, if you know how to hire a great copy editor. Like you can put the pieces together. And so it was kind of in that same mode. I just thought, well, I know enough people to put this together. Like we only need a small team. I know how to do this. And so let's just do it ourselves. Well, of course, we don't get any money budget up front to do it, but it had the advantage that there was no travel. It was not a huge budget thing. Like I could generate all the tape just basically like sitting at my computer. So it was kind of like all that was in the air. And yeah, for this combination of like frustrations I had in the past, and then just like a clear opening of like, there's a way that this can be done.
Yeah, it took the next question out of my mouth. Essentially, with the Atavist, you've pivoted away from the Atavist for several years now. But I wanted to get a sense of what starting the Atavist, and when it was in 2011, and how that might have set you up for this, having that experience in the chamber.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the experience there was that I was interested in doing really narrative stories. I've done all kinds of magazine stories, but I had a particular love of stories with a beginning, middle, and end, stories with characters and plots, and nonfiction that reads like a short story, that sort of thing. And at the time, there just weren't many outlets that wanted to do those at length, that were open to a lot of different writers. So of course the New Yorker does those stories. They've done some of the great ones, but at the time it was sort of like, you're David Grann, you get to do those stories. If you're Susan Orlean, you get to do those stories. If you're me, once in a while I did get to do some of those stories at the New Yorker, but like there's just only so many slots because they're also doing all of the stuff that they fills out the whole magazine. And so only one of every other issue or something, or even less, is going to be that kind of story. So I just said, well, maybe we could just do it ourselves. If we had figured out the budgets, we could build them the same way. We could adopt the same standards. And then we had all these other ideas about digital design and doing them online and doing them in apps and all the kind of stuff that Atavist ended up doing. But the kind of fundamental thing that I wanted to do was, well, what if we could produce that ourselves, and we could kind of like expand the number of opportunities for those stories to get told. So, and it turned out it is possible. I mean, the biggest problem, and I've worked on Pop-Up Magazine also, like it was the same thing. The biggest problem is these big institutions, the things they have are money and marketing. So they're able to like, it's not even marketing, audience probably. They're able to like get these stories in front of a big audience because they have built up a big audience and they built up a lot of credibility, and they have the budgets to like really put the money into them. So you got to solve those problems, obviously. But in terms of actually like producing the stories, if you get a bunch of people together that know what they're doing, it's not any different. It's not any different than being inside an institution. It's the same pieces. You can use the same pieces to create the same kind of work.
Did you run into, just especially when you're starting Atavist, that it was sometimes when you come up with an idea and you're like, oh, this is great, and then you start thinking about it, you're like, well, if I'm thinking about it, then it can't be that great of an idea. And it's like someone else will probably do it. And this sort of like negative self-talk that often creeps in. And I wonder, like, when you were starting Atavist, or even starting some other things that you have gotten up off the ground, how have you wrestled with that negative self-talk that often gets in the way of, of people gaining altitude and starting something that could potentially be special?
I mean, it's different. It's vastly different for me between a story idea and this kind of like entrepreneurial idea, or like a project that's going to turn into a publication or something like that. Like if I have a story idea, I think someone else is going to do it because it's good, not because I'm worried that I can't do it. Like, yeah. I have a huge list of ideas, but a lot of them I'm kind of like, someone will probably do that. But if I hit on one that I think, oh my God, that is a magazine story, I would bet you $1,000 that will be in a magazine or a podcast within the next year. Like that happens to me all the time. And so for those, it's like, how quickly can I do this? Am I going to be able to pull this off? And sometimes I just abandon it because I'm just like, there's no way that I'm going to beat whoever started working on this. There's one like this right now. Like I want to start it, and I may just like check into it to see if anyone's heard, if any of the players have heard from anyone, but I guarantee you someone's already doing it. It's such a good story. It's different with these other ideas. Like with Atavist, I just sort of thought, well, someone should do this, and then I kind of like half-heartedly tried to get a grant, and then I didn't get a grant. I always get rejected from that sort of thing. So I got rejected. And then I was like, well, fuck it. I don't know. What am I going to start? I'm going to start some institution. Like, I just want to do my own freelancing. And then I happened to like have a partner, someone who ended up as my partner in the business, Nick Thompson, who is a very energetic, very positive, full of confidence about what is possible if you just do it. So he basically said, like, why don't we just do it? Like, let's just do it. I know another guy. Like, let's just get together. Let's just start it. And I never would have done it without that. That's the truth. Like, I just would have continued freelancing. And the same happened with Pop-Up Magazine when we started that. Like, that was not my idea, but we kind of got together and had drinks and we were like, let's put on a show. And everybody remembers from that original drinks that I was like, we can't charge more than $5. Like, no one will come. And everyone was like, what do you mean? I was like, my friends won't even come if we charge $5. And they were like, let's charge $20 for the first one. I was like, this is ridiculous. And then it was sold out. It's just like, I don't have that kind of confidence in kind of like finding the audience and building everything up. Although now maybe I would more because I've done it a few times. But I mean, I think the way I got through that was just getting together with other people, because it's also fun. It's fun to create something out of nothing and then suddenly have people paying some attention to it. And it fuels you growing the organization. It fuels you having bigger ideas, and that fuels a bigger audience. And so none of these things would I ever have done on my own, just never. But if there's one or two other people who are energetic and maybe have a little different outlook than you, then that's what kind of gets them off the ground for me.
That's great. I love hearing you talk about, the confidence angle of it. And it's funny you bring that up. I've just been really thinking a lot about that lately. Of someone who's just been chronically not confident over the years. You hear with Nick Thompson there, where he said he's very confident in regards to, and energetic and positive when it comes to, let's say, this launching startups or stuff of that nature. Whereas maybe you lacked a little bit of that early on. But what would you identify as something that you're confident in? You're like, yeah, that's the thing I'm good at, and I can really lean into.
Well, I mean, I feel like I can deliver a story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like, I mean, it would be kind of sad if I couldn't. I've been at it for this long.
Right.
Let's be honest. But like, I feel like if you give me a good story, or I find a good story, most of the things I generate myself. So like, if I find something and someone will give me the runway to like go do it, whether it's audio or it's written, like, I feel confident that I can deliver it. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't moments where I get really thrown off, or for instance, what I said, like, what you're halfway through and then someone you find out someone else is doing the same thing. You think, oh my God, now I got to beat this person. Like, I hate that. I'm not a kind of like competitive in that way. Like, I don't enjoy the competition, and I'm not a scoop person, and I'm not trying to like work my sources to be 10 seconds first before someone else. Like, I like long, in-depth, complicated stories. And the thing I feel confident about is my ability to eventually get inside those stories and bring back something interesting and tell it in an interesting way. So as long as I'm focused on that, I'm doing all right. It's everything else around the business. I mean, the whole working as a freelancer, as a writer in audio, all these things, it's just like a battle against cynicism. It's a battle against bitterness, and it's a battle against kind of like letting your confidence be destroyed by the many different like mistreatments and rejections that you receive over many years. Like, that's just what it is. And so everybody that I know has their ups and downs with that. I'm sure there are uber confident people that don't have their ups and downs with that out there somewhere, but that's just part of it. And so I try to, like, as long as I can like be on an assignment, I am totally absorbed in that assignment, and I usually feel pretty good about what I'm getting and where I'm going with it,
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you had the idea for Shell Game, might have been some, models or examples, be it in print or audio, that kind of set the table for you? Be like, oh, this is, if we can kind of mimic this structure, this, this kind of this pacing, these are some examples that were like, okay, we can kind of lean on these as a means to see how it's been done before.
I don't totally work that way in terms of like, I can't think of something. I'm not saying there's not something out there that's like, nothing's ever been done
Yeah,
like Shell Game.
right.
But like, there wasn't something that I said, oh, this is like this thing, but on our topic, like, because it was different. It's actually was different than what I normally do and what I like to do. Like, I like to tell one story. And this was actually, it was one story, and I endeavored to turn it into one story, but each episode is kind of trying a different thing. So they're all kind of a little bit their own self-contained stories, and then threads get pulled from one across to the next, and hopefully they all kind of come together at the end is the idea. But I don't normally do stuff that way. So for me, it was just sort of like feeling out what I wanted it to be. Now, in terms of like tone, there are things that I will just go back to all the time, like S-Town, like Brian Reed and S-Town. I'll just listen to the opener for a couple of episodes. I probably listen to some of them 50 times. I don't know. And just kind of like, just the feel, it's like the idea of taking such a serious approach to a story, that you have these reflections, that you're dipping into these details, you're making it funny, and then you're kind of pulling back and telling people a little bit about what you're thinking, what you're experiencing. Like, it's more like a mode than it is anything like structure, or like even how he talks. Like, I can't be Brian Reed any more than I could be, like any of the Sarah Koenig or whatever, Dan Taberski, or like any of the amazing narrative storytellers in podcasting. Like, I can't be those people, but like, I like the mode that they're in when they're being funny, and I kind of like will listen to that just to get it into my head. Like, oh, okay, this is the approach. And then, hopefully mine sounds different, but also has some of that, I don't know, that feeling to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of like the openings too. Yeah, you bring up S-Town. I'm like, oh yeah. I can feel like that it rhymes a little bit, and I even think of Wind of Change too. I've listened to that several times. I just
Sure, yeah.
I just love just the journey that takes you on, and similarly, Shell Game takes you on a journey.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. I mean, both from a practical perspective, which is you're trying to get people to keep listening to it. So you want people to get to the end of the first one or the first section or whatnot and say, oh, well, I got to keep listening to this, and your ultimate test of that is someone saying, whatever, I didn't get out of my car for 20 minutes because I wanted to listen to the end of this. And that's, of course, what you want. But it's harder. I mean, there's a reason why there's fucking true crime everywhere, which is like, it's very natural how that happens. Like, you tell one bit, and then if you stop somewhere, people are like, oh my God, wait, what about this piece of evidence? And they want to keep going. And so trying to create that with something that doesn't have a natural narrative like that is a very interesting challenge, and trying to figure out what you think would draw people into another part of the story. That's kind of the fun of it. That's the challenge of it. But I like listening to all these places that just do it so well. And then you can kind of like borrow. I mean, you're not really borrowing directly because like the stories are different, but just like the idea is, oh, they stopped it there. I see. Like, I see how they're doing that. And then you can try to kind of apply the same concept to your own work.
Say with the mastermind, there was a lot of travel involved, with that, and it was kind of a harrowing reporting journey, and then you said, sort of at the start of our conversation with this, like it was largely, from like your home office, a lot of the reporting and everything together. It was just, what was the experience like of just, here was something that was, largely kind of almost like a domesticated reporting experience versus globetrotting.
I mean, in one sense, it was amazing. It was real up and down because it was incredible. I could generate literally as much tape as we could ever use in a day or 2 days if I wanted, because basically I have this AI voice agent hooked up to phone numbers, and I can have it call whoever I wanted, and it could receive calls from whoever I wanted. So, for instance, I set up this scam line. So I seeded the telephone number out in the world. All these scammers and telemarketers would call the line, and the AI agent with my voice picks up and has conversations with them. But I mean, it goes all day. It's going right now. Let me see. It's probably got a call today. It gets like five to 10 a day, some of which last as long as 20 minutes. So yeah, I got a couple today. It's just generating tape all the time, which if you've ever tried to do a narrative show where you go around and try to interview people, like my show before this, Persona, like we went to France, we went to Israel, one guy died right before you interviewed him. Like, it's like, that's the whole deal, which I love too. But this was kind of like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I just like press some buttons and I have more tape. But then I realized, oh, I'm going to get myself into a nightmare here, because if it's not incredibly organized, then we're never going to even be able to listen to all this. I had to come up with the whole system that's like, I would have to comb through them. And the very first time I heard it, I would have to note what it was, the date, the time, which platform it was using, because I have all these different AI platforms, and like try get the transcript, get the prompt that I used, and all this shit had to be organized, because if not, like, it was useless. It was useless to be collecting tape all the time that you can't even listen to. And we didn't have a team of 5 people to listen to tape. Basically, it was like me and Sophie Bridges, my producer, who listened to the tape. So that became like the additional challenge. It's like, it's nice. It's pretty nice to be able to not go anywhere and generate tape, but then also it becomes more of like an organizational problem than a reporting problem, let's say. But still, like, I still had the same issues where like you want certain conversations, and it's like, oh, I want to try this. And the great thing was I didn't have to call anyone to get an interview. I could just do that thing.
And speaking of organizational, like, as you're starting to gather all this tape and curate what feels like relevant story beats, how are you starting to arc out, say, individual episodes, and then arc out what ends up being an entire season?
Well, I don't want to make it sound more intricate than it was. It was basically like I kept a little list. I keep these kind of like running documents sometimes. And so I had this running document where I would just throw things in. This is some stuff that the AI did today. These are calls I made today. This was early on. Then they started to sort a little bit. I could see, oh, okay, well, I'm using this thing to call my friends and family. So that's probably an episode, like personal stuff. I've used it to like call, the first thing I used it on was calling customer service. That was obviously the first episode. And then I knew I wanted to call scammers. Like, scammers are an interest of mine. And like, I'd already thought like, oh, this would be great to use on scammers. So I made that second. And then there was sort of like a lot of things floating around. And then I would just sort of like literally have a little list that was like 1, customer service, 2, scammers, 3, this, 4, this, 5, this. Like, I wanted to send it to therapy. So like, this therapy is episode 4, it's episode 3, like just toying around. It wasn't some intricate outline or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just started writing scripts. Like, we just didn't have time. We set very, very tight deadlines for ourselves because we wanted to get it out as of the beginning of July. And we were starting production. I'd gathered a lot of tape, but we were starting production basically in June, mid-May. So we didn't have much time. So there wasn't a lot of time for intricate discussions over it. It was sort of like, what if we did this? And we did take one whole episode and change the order, but that was like a huge lift. Like, the whole schedule had to be flipped in order for us to do that. So it was as we went, which is, to me, is like a fun way to do it, as long as everyone kind of knows what they're doing and you don't have a bunch of people hovering over it saying like, when can I listen to a draft of episode 1, so that they can then say, oh, well, you need more up top. Like, you really need some lines that say like, AI is going to change the world and shit like that. It's just like, I understand why all that structure exists for places with like a lot of institutional bureaucracy, but like, we didn't have any of that, and that felt amazing.
Yeah, I at the start of our conversation, we kind of talked about the punk rock ethos of it, and that's what I really love about what you're able to bring to this, and I think is all the more inspiring for people who might be reluctant to, say, pick up the microphone and like start something on their own in this regard, and just like, let's do it fast, get it out there, and and not have to answer to anyone except a small cohort of people who really believe in it. So, serving those listeners and just bringing something cool to the forefront without a lot of that institutional bureaucracy that you alluded to. It's just, it's so charged with that kind of energy. And I imagine it's excited you all the more to keep on going too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we were having a lot of fun making it. And I think for this particular type of show, like that helps. Like it comes through. Like people say that to me. Like it sounds like you were having a lot of fun making this. And not everything that I do, but certainly not everything in journalism can fit into that. Things that are deeply investigative often require more institutional support. This was not a deep investigative kind of project for me. But in a general sense, like I think I really appreciate when people do these kinds of projects, when people go off on their own and decide to just do it themselves without all of the architecture that has like built up around a kind of medium. So I'm into it. I don't want to oversell it though. It's like I had a producer who happened to be free, who I already knew, who is incredible. Like she's incredible at that stuff. Like she could do everything, including cutting massive amounts of tape really quickly, adding music, doing her own, like she has her own editorial outlook and editorial insights because she'd worked on a bunch of narrative shows before. So I couldn't have done it on my own. Again, like I can't cut all that tape. I could cut together like a little sizzle reel. Like I did that and kind of like sold her on it. Like, listen to this. Like she was like, oh yeah, this sounds interesting. But so you do need the right pieces for audio, especially. Like you need someone who really knows what they're doing if you're going to do a narrative show. Because if it kind of, it's okay if it sounds a little ragged. I think that's fine. But like there are certain fundamental things that you have to be able to do in order to get it out. And then also, like my wife is the executive producer, and she has worked in audio, and she launched a bunch of shows, so she knew aspects around like you have to be, it has to get on this platform at this time or it will not appear on the launch date. Like it has to be uploaded, this metadata goes here, like all this stuff that's like so mundane, but like it does not look professional if you don't launch it in that way. So I had, it wasn't just me like messing around, it's like you got to get people together who know what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and in terms of the story arc of the season, it does seem to, like you say, like it goes to therapy, and then it starts to, it starts to get a little more personal. It starts to talk to more people, more in your orbit. And what was the trepidation of maybe wrestling with sending the agent into your friend circle, your professional circle, and what that might entail?
I mean, initially, like I didn't have much trepidation about actually doing it because I was having fun doing it. I was having fun. I mean, it's basically pranking them at some level. They don't know what it is. They're expecting a call from me. I mean, I should say like this thing is attached to my phone number, and so I could attach it to a bunch of phone numbers, but I could also attach it to my phone number. So if you were my friend for 30 years and you just got a call from me one day and picked up, and like I was acting weird, like to me, it was kind of fun and funny. Now it did go off the rails, and it went to some very strange places that I did not expect that are in the show. But I would say the thing that was it took more for me to say, yes, I want to do this, was including those things in the show, because I have done projects in the past that are somewhat personal, but I'm not like a memoirist. Like I don't write about my friends and family. I don't think I'm that interesting outside of like doing journalistic projects. And this was one where I was these people most of the people that I knew were like subjected to it. And then I was going to play their reactions in public. So that was what I was worried about. But people were really good about it. And people seemed to like really love the spirit of it. And so that kind of assuaged my worries as we went along. Like when I said to people like, hey, I'm thinking about using this, they were like, oh yeah, you got to use that. Like I lost my mind on that call, it was that kind of thing. So people were very encouraging for me to use it. And then when it came to my family, that was even more delicate, because it was kind of a delicate time in general for us, but everybody was into it. I'm partly they're used to, I've been doing this for so long, like At a certain level, they were like, "Oh yeah, sometimes you do weird stuff." I did this story for Wired so years ago where I vanished, and that was like the one where people were like, "What are you doing?"
Right.
And so now people are like, "Oh, it's like that vanish thing." Like that was 15 years ago, so it's not like I do it very often.
Yeah, the one part that made me squirm a bit was in the final episode where you set it off on your friend, but the context of that was you had a shared friend who sounded similarly off. It was kind of a red flag, and then your friend here was like really like worried about you, and he's talking to the AI version of you, and he's like really worried, and I was just like that was uncomfortable. I'm really happy you went there, had the courage to go there, because like that felt like, oh my god, I feel like he's overstepped at this moment, and I was like happy that you did that because I think we needed to push it in a direction that made the listener uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I had to include it.
Yeah.
There was no way that I couldn't include it with his permission. But yeah, and I think that was partly, if that hadn't happened, because there were a lot of people who reacted very not positively, but like in a fun way to getting called by this AI version of me, because they would figure out that it wasn't me, and then they would kind of either mess with it or they would like go with it. And some of those conversations are also amazing. But what I was trying to get at in the show was just how sort of strange and unsettling all of this stuff is going to get. And I was kind of like pushing it as far as possible in order to kind of create some of those scenarios that we will all experience in the near or distant future. And so when this one kind of really went off the rails, and my friend thought like maybe I was having I'd had maybe like a little bit of a breakdown, it was just so like it was really painful for me to listen to the tape. But when you listen to it, you're like, oh, I see. I see what happens when the world is full of these things that are maybe you and maybe not, maybe human, maybe not. Like you get these unique kinds of misunderstandings, and they can go to really dark places. And so yeah, I mean, I felt like it was important to kind of take everyone there, even though it was like it's very uncomfortable to listen to, partly because one of the rules that we made for the show at the beginning was we would not cut out the silences. Like if you listen to any podcast, narrative podcast, they're always trimming the audio. Like
Yeah.
they unless there's like a dramatic pause, they'll like clip things down. But these AIs, one of their problems is they're a little too slow sometimes, or a lot of the time. So there are these pauses before they respond. It's called latency. But we decided not to cut out any of the latency because it seemed like cheating to like make them sound better than they were. And so because of that, there are these long, just like painful silences that we force everyone to listen to, actually in several of the episodes, that normally you would just absolutely cut out, which again is like part of doing it independently, is we knew we wanted to do that, and we just did not want someone saying like, no one wants to hear 5 seconds of silence. And I'm like, exactly, yeah, that's why we want to do it. We want to make them listen to it. So yeah, that one was, it was significant. But my friend and we're still very close. It hasn't affected our friendship.
Right, that's good. I'm happy to hear that, because it was one of those things where you wonder about what the project did, or maybe what it could do to other people's, like just the fundamental trust that they have between each other. If it became too pervasive, like, oh my god, like, I'm sure you've been asked this a million times. It was like, who am I talking to right now? And that was never an issue before, but now it's like people might be thinking like, oh, is this AI Evan or my friend, my best friend?
Yeah. Yeah. I go through that now. I mean, of course, I exacerbate it because sometimes, I mean, I didn't do it today, but like sometimes if I'm doing interviews, I'll just send it. I'll send it instead of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's interesting to see what happens. And yeah, and my friend, it's mostly joking now. People will pick up and be like, say something that shows that it's you, and I'll tell them something from our distant past that maybe it wouldn't know, although it knows a lot because I've fed it a lot of information. But yeah, I think these are the kinds of trust issues that I was interested in, not because I was trying to get away from a lot of the AI, writing about AI and coverage of AI that I find a little bit ponderous. And one place that I wanted to go is just like, what does it mean that there are going to be more AI agents in the world than humans, like inevitably, because they're so easy to make.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already true on the internet. There's bots everywhere. And like, how does it feel to not know if you're encountering a human or not? Does it matter? Do you, if it accomplishes the objective you were trying to accomplish, making a phone call, do you care? Is there something more unsettling about it? Those were the questions I wanted to like get at.
Yeah, I know for one, like I hate making cold calls to call sources to do that introduction, and it's just it got me thinking like, wow, what if you outsource it to someone who is inert to the whole idea of the anxiety around it, and and to even just to make the intro, because sometimes they might tell you to fuck off and it'll ruin your day. Or so what if someone else, what if the AI broke the ice for you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, salespeople are already absolutely using this technology for exactly that. Like they are using it for cold calling, partly because like you waste a lot of time cold calling. A lot of people don't pick up, and so it can just like leave a voicemail in your voice, you know? So like most of the time someone calling for sales, like they don't get anyone. And if you can leave a voicemail that's in your voice that says like, "Hey, it's me, blah, blah, blah," that is absolutely like a technology that is being deployed right now. I did use it for reporting because I wanted to test that out, doing interviews. You know, nobody likes doing cold calls for interviews for sure. I mean, the problem there is the people I picked to interview for the most part were people who worked in AI. So like they kind of worked on the same platform I was using to call them with. And I thought, well, they can't get mad because if they get mad, it's like undermining their own product. Like they're saying we should all, you know, these are useful. So if they get called by one, they can't be like, I can't fucking believe you called me with this. But with other people, what you're really afraid of when you, I don't know what you're, it's just natural to be nervous when you cold call someone out of nowhere and you're like, I need to ask you about this,
Yeah.
even whether it's very serious or even if it's not as serious. Sometimes it's just hard to make that call, but you're kind of afraid they're going to be annoyed or mad or just like that their response is going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like using an AI is not going to solve that because that person's going to call you back and be like, what what is this? You know, like your chances of making them mad or uncomfortable are greater with the AI currently than with yourself. So I don't think it'll solve the cold calling problem. It can conduct a pretty decent interview if you give it like questions and like beats, bullet points, basically. Like it'll follow those and like it'll ask the questions. It's not great at follow-ups. It'll let a lot of things go, but like when you there's certain kinds of interviews that are pretty rote, like you're just trying to get some information for a story, and like I'm here to tell you like an AI, I'm not saying you should or I approve of it or I support this or I want to be replaced, but like that was one of the things I wanted to investigate was like, can it do this? And the answer is yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, I wrote down that I want to ask you, like, what questions did this project answer for you, and what more questions did it raise for you as you proceed?
I mean, the question that it definitively answered for me is that we will encounter these more and more everywhere. Like, I don't think that's something because there's a lot of depends on how closely you follow like the AI industry or on social media, like on Twitter or X. Like, there's sort of like it's hitting a wall, and AI is gonna the AI is gonna be like NFTs and they're going to disappear. Like no one's going to be talking about AI in 2 years. It's all hype. All these companies are going to go away. There is like a whole kind of like push towards that. But the problem is like, even as it exists now, these AI agents are useful and they're useful to save money for companies that make calls, that receive calls, that do customer service, that take orders, all sorts of things, even if they're not fully human sounding. So like either way, you got to grapple with either like these sort of semi-human, almost human things that are going to be everywhere in the world, or they are going to get better and better, in which case they will be indistinguishable from humans. Like already people couldn't tell that mine wasn't human sometimes, and it wasn't even like the best one that's out there. So there will be this question, and the further I got in, the more confident I was I guess that's not like a question it answered for me. It just like verified for me that like this will be an ongoing question. There will be more and more of these. This is going to be something we're going to have to grapple with. I guess what was left open for me is the question of like how we're going to treat them, like how we're going to treat how we use these things and how we incorporate them into our lives and how much we're going to accept or reject them. And I think right now there's sort of a broad-based idea of rejection where there are people like they're just turned off by the whole thing. I also have that feeling, but if you look back at other technologies, like there's always that feeling, and then like because it's useful, it just like kind of filters into life. And what I was trying to do was like say this is the moment where we could discuss, where we could think about like what do we want from this and what do we not want from it. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think we are kind of poised at a point where it's not going to go away, but we do have some ways that we could push it in one direction or another.
Mm. Yeah, what got me thinking as well is, and the idea of the therapy bots kind of got me thinking of it. It was just this idea. So like my mom is like aging, kind of has dementia. It's not horrible dementia yet, but there's dementia there, and and I was just like, well, like it would be very hard for me personally to engage with her now, just because it can just be difficult. But I was like, well, what if you did set up, just a phone call with the AI voice that is, I don't know, it appeases, her diminishing mind without the personal cost of having to, say, endure such a conversation or insults that might come your way or stuff of that. I don't know if I would do it, but it got me thinking of that. I don't know if that came across, your reporting and, just while you were thinking about it.
Yeah, of course. And that's people ask about that. People, I mean, one of the things about this technology is that people, when they hear about it, or when they listen to the show, like they want to talk about it. And that's one of the things that people want to talk about. And I feel like it's a really good example because there are people who will reject that out of hand, who will say, well, what kind of person would do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like have your mom call an AI and think she's talking to you and not be talking to you, just because you don't want to deal with the fact that your relative has Alzheimer's or your relative has dementia. It's like, I don't know, maybe that person has never dealt with that situation and the emotional challenges of that and the burden of that. And like the idea of making someone feel better. And then I think it's a big ethical question,
Yeah.
that people will have to answer for themselves, but it's not something that you would say, well, let's just say that's not possible. That's outside of the bounds of humanity that we would ever do that. People grapple with that shit on a daily basis. Like, should I tell my mother that I'm not this person, that I am their child, that I am not my brother? Like people who have encountered this, they know all about this. And like, should you lie to them or should you not lie to them? Like what makes them feel better? What feels right for you? Like these are questions that people already grapple with. So the fact that they would introduce into that, maybe the idea that like, sometimes you're not always available if they call you 10, 20 times a day. And like, maybe an AI answers. Like, I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I definitely know that like, I wouldn't take someone who's in that position like yourself and say like, oh, you can't use this tool that might be at your disposal because that would make you less than human. It's just like people have such strong feelings about it. But the reality is like if something can help a situation, I know people will definitely use it for that. I'm certain.
And at the very end of the show, it's basically in the credit of the final episode too. You include some tape where you are talking to your voice agent and you are clearly tired and it's seemingly and borderline just like, I am sick of you, and your voice agent has no idea. It's just like, yeah, you're gonna, it's like just going on like, yep, you have a good day, and you're just like, yeah, it's just like, I am done with you right now. And I just wanted to get a sense of including that tape in the thought process of it, because it was very illustrative just to experience that on tape, on the ear.
Yeah, I mean that's one in every episode we put like a bit of tape after the credits, and we never told anyone like, and a lot of people just stop at the credits, you know, like when I'm listening to podcasts I stop at the credits, but it was kind of like for the people who kept going, it was like a little treat, and then people would realize, oh, there's one in the second one, there's going to be one in all of them. And then but the whole time I had this idea that like I never talked to my AI like in the whole show. It talks to itself, like you have two AIs talking to each other, but you never hear me talking to my AI. And I literally had never like, that's not true. I had like tested it out. So I would do test calls with it, but I never like tried to have a conversation with it. And so I had this idea that that was going to be the last bit. But then we were finishing the last episode, and it was, you know, it was just tough. It was like, my wife and I were away, and like with the family, and like we were supposed to be on vacation, and I was like up in this attic and like doing the last edits and doing the last tracking, and then finally like I finished the last bit of tracking, and I was like, oh, I gotta do that. I gotta have a conversation with it. But it was like, I don't know, midnight or later probably. And actually the funny thing is my wife, she could hear, like she couldn't hear what I was saying, but like the walls were really thin, and she could like hear that I was talking to someone, and she was like, who is he calling right now? And I was just up there like talking to the thing. And then I was like, well, we'll see how that goes. And I tacked it on to the end of the episode, and then we listened to it, and it was like strangely powerful, because as you say, like I was like wrecked, and I was just like, oh man, we're done, you know. And it was like, yes, we're done. But I was trying to have an emotional conversation with it, but it kind of went there in an interesting way. But yeah, I appreciate you listening all the way to the end, because I don't know how many people listened all the way to the end and actually got to that part of the show.
Well, that's great. Well, it's an incredible feat of work, and just the ethos behind it and the way you went about it is incredible. And I just can't wait to see what you come up next with it. So Evan, I'm so glad we got to touch base again and talk some shop. And so thanks so much for coming back on the show, and continued success. And I can't wait for what comes next.
Hey, thanks, man. It's always great to talk to you.
The energy, it was manic today. Yes. Awesome. Yes. We did it. We did it again. Somehow this show comes together every week. I have no idea. Like truly, I like just go into this hole, this black hole, and then somehow surface from beyond the end of the event horizon. This is what happens if I talk without a script. And maybe one day we'll make a happy buck off of it. If it weren't for the Patreon crew, we'd make $0 American dollars. So visit patreon.com/CNFpod. Shop around. You might find something you like. Thanks to Evan for coming back on the show and talking to this clown. We recorded this back in September, so it's nice to finally be catching up on the backlog somewhat. Stupid Frontrunner. You can pre-order the Frontrunner wherever you buy your books. If you don't, I think there's a clause in my contract where they foreclose on my house that I have to look at the fine print, but it's already signed, so who knows. The past weekend, I recorded my first ever live podcast. I wrote a little blog about it at brendanamara.com. Hey, there was a time back in the age of flip phones when it took effort to read your favorite blogs or websites. You would have to list, like, get your bookmarks and like organize them in your browser, and it'd be part of your routine to just check on those websites to see if your favorite writers or creators had anything new to offer. I checked Metallica.com every day back in the day, and that actually led to a story I had written on this young woman who was abducted and murdered, Morgan Dana Harrington, who was at a Metallica show, and yeah, I wrote a story about that a few years ago. But point being, like, you know, I would always check on Metallica, and because I love them, and lots of other people too. And then along comes social media, and people are sharing links, and by clicking on links or stopping your scroll over certain images, machines began learning about you and turning the dials up on some things and down on others. You know, we let the machines feed us what they thought we were interested in, even things we weren't. Yeah, even if we wanted to get updates from the people we followed, unless we actively sought them out. Like I remember, a while ago, this happened frequently, but one particular incident was, I was like, oh, I haven't seen Bronwyn Dickey's stuff here in a while. Like I haven't seen her in my feed in ages. Like, has she just gone off the grid? And she hadn't. She was posting stuff, but for whatever reason, it wasn't coming my way. And I want to know what she's up to, what she's working on, and just, she's my friend, and I want to know what's happening. So I had to actively seek it. Back in the day, the internet was beautifully inconvenient in that regard. You had to seek it out. You had to go see things in person. That's what I long for these days. And I'm an introvert, so doing things in person is like a heavy lift, let me tell you. And when it happens, like I come home and like the battery is drained, friend. It's just what I long for, to lean into that inconvenience, to bookmark things again and actively visit the websites of authors or artists and see what they're up to. I have a little thing that I'll expand it, but there's already some there on my website, brendanamaro.com, where it's just my little newsstand, and it's like newsletters and websites that I like, and you can go there and click on those, and it's a nice portal without social media where you can go check out just other cool creators and writers and whatever. And so the live event at Gratitude Brewing, it was inconvenient. You had to attend in person to see the real, raw, live show. It was recorded for podcast purposes. That audio surprisingly came out good. I know. It will be edited, as I always do, and rebroadcast, but if you weren't there, you missed it. There was pressure from one subset of the Oregon Writers Colony members to live stream it so they didn't have to leave their homes. But that would defeat the purpose. I understand there are accessibility issues, but the podcast will be up as a place to experience that. And we had a soft opening, and about 15 people showed up on a Sunday afternoon, bought food, beer, tea, coffee, whatever, and got to experience something of the moment, something inconvenient, because they had to go out and put people pants on, people clothes. That's what my wife and I call them, because anytime we get out of our sweatpants, we call them people pants, and the dogs freak out because they know we're leaving. Leave their homes, get in their cars, find parking, commune in public. That can be tough. Buy stuff from our gracious host at Gratitude Brewing and experience something that was here 1 minute and gone the next. People exchanged business cards. They chatted each other up. Val, who was there, she sold some of her books. Like, it was a get-together. It was like a cookout or something. I don't know. There were no Zoom windows open. This was face-to-face. This was raging against the algorithm at its purest. I'll have more to say about our next event in April, but for our first rodeo, it was pretty perfect and proof of concept. Ruby McConnell and I hatched this idea about a year ago to do something inconvenient and reawaken that lost spirit of the live event. Something Eugene just doesn't have. This in conversation kind of thing. It's going to be a quarterly deal. Maybe there'll be copycats, but we took the lead and nobody's going to catch us. And I'm pretty proud of that. I'm proud of what we did, and I'm pretty proud of what's going to happen. I'm real excited about it. We got the juice, man. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can do, interview. See ya.